We'd like to welcome you to the first ever episode of Smoke It, Don't Grill It. In today's episode, we're going to talk about three different things. The first being, what is the difference between northern barbecuing and southern barbecuing? Second, where did the idea of smoking pork ribs come from? And third, a recipe that I like to use when I smoke pork ribs. So let's get started. Number one, what is the difference between northern barbecue and southern barbecue? If you were to ask a Yankee, so to speak, what it means to barbecue, they'd probably say something like this. They're going to go fire up the grill. They're going to throw some meat on there. They're going to smother it in barbecue sauce, and a very short time later, they're going to have barbecue. In contrast, if you were to ask a southerner what is barbecuing, they would tell you something much different. They would go fire up their smoker with a fire being the main source of heat, creating a smoky environment, allowing the meat to be able to absorb and soak in all the smoke. And this process does not take just a few minutes. This process can take up to 6 to 24 hours depending on the type of meat that you're trying to smoke. For the purposes of this podcast, we're going to refer to the southern way of barbecuing as smoking, just so we don't get it confused with the northern way of barbecuing. Now, as to which barbecuing is better, well, that's a matter of opinion. In my opinion, smoking is way better than northern barbecuing. The texture of the meat is better. The flavor of the meat is better, in my opinion. It's just all around more juicy and just a better cooked piece of meat. Hence, that's the reason why I've decided to name this podcast Smoke It, Don't Grill It. Number two, where did the idea of smoking ribs come from? There's a lot of different ideas out there of when smoking started and who started it. But one thing that we can really pin down for sure is that it did start here in the Americas, and it was heavily influenced by the Native Americans. This is demonstrated to us through Christopher Columbus. On his second voyage over here, he witnessed Native Americans slow cooking fish over coals. And this would be adopted into American culture as a way to prepare food. Now let's talk a little bit about pork and smoking pork. In 1607, the first pigs arrived in Virginia along with the original settlers of Jamestown. Pigs soon became a very popular livestock because they were easy to raise, they're easy to feed, and they made some really good tasting meat. They also produced copious amounts of meat, which made it ideal for serving large crowds, big family gatherings, and we can even see smoking pigs and just smoking in general influence politics at the time, where politicians would get together at these big gatherings and they'd feed the people this delicious meat. Kind of a fun side note in regards to the history of smoking that I found interesting was, even in colonial times, something that was always present at a smokeout was the consumption of alcohol. And we still see these patterns today in 2018. If you go to a smoking competition down south, we see massive amounts of alcohol being consumed. Why is this? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Maybe it's just because it takes 24 hours for the meat to cook, or maybe it's just simply people get together and they want to have a good time. The third and final part of this podcast is a recipe that I like to use to smoke ribs. One of the beautiful things about smoking is there's not really a set way or a set recipe to use when smoking. It's kind of an experimental thing. You want to smoke to your tastes, and I'd encourage any beginner smoker or advanced smoker to do so, because I think that's where a lot of the fun comes in when you're smoking for these long periods of time, is to create different flavors and find a flavor that you really enjoy as a person, as you. And I think that most smokers would agree with me on this idea. So there are a few things that you will need in order to smoke. The first being an actual smoker of some sort. Some people try to get away with not using a smoker, like they'll use their grill and they'll just throw a few wood chunks in there and it'll smoke a little bit and then they'll pull it off and they'll say they have smoked meat. You know, this really doesn't work. The purpose of smoking is to let the meat sit in that smoke for a long period of time. In fact, the end product, when you cut into your meat, you want to see what's called a smoke ring, which is a fine pink ring on the outside of your meat. And that's just telling you that the smoke was able to soak into the meat and give it that smoky flavor. So a smoker is something that you need. You have to have in order to smoke. A few other things that I use when I'm smoking is a flavor injector, so just kind of a big syringe with a needle on it, and so I can inject different like apple juice or like a wine or an alcohol, whiskey of some sort, just to kind of break down the meat and allow it to be more tender and juicy at the end. So let's get on with it. Smoking does require a little bit of babysitting. In fact, this specific recipe that we're going to go over takes anywhere from 5.5 to 6.5 hours. And you're going to need to be close to meat because you'll have to spray it down a series of times to keep them moist and keep them from not going dry. So when you go and pick out your ribs, what you want to look for is what's called marbled meat. And marbled meat is kind of hard to explain, so the best way that I can think of to explain this and to get this point across would be to just Google it. If you pull up on your phone and just type in marbled meat, you will see a bunch of pictures of what it looks like. But the actual definition of it is meat that contains various amounts of intermuscular fat that gives it a marble appearance. You don't want a ton of fat, but you do want fat when you're smoking, because fat really absorbs juices and then distributes it through the rest of the meat. Once you get your ribs home, the first thing that you need to do is take off the membrane that's on the back of the ribs. A lot of people will skip this step, and this is a step you really cannot skip, simply because if you don't take it off, it will make your ribs very tough and very stringy at the end. After I take the membrane off, what I usually do is I'll inject some apple juice, some red wine vinegar, if you're feeling experimental, maybe some bourbon of some sort, into the ribs themselves. And you can do every other rib, you can do every rib, it's just kind of up to you what you want to do. Depending on what I'm using, and for this recipe I use a red wine apple juice mix, I inject every rib. The next thing that you're going to want to do is fire up your smoker and bring it up to temp. For this particular recipe, we're going to smoke between 225 and 235 degrees. One of the biggest things when you're smoking to pay attention to is your temperature. You do not want to fluctuate very much. You want to stay kind of right in between 225 and 235. If you're bouncing all the way from like 180 up to 280 and everywhere in between, your end product's just not going to be as good. The more consistent your temperature is, the better your meat is going to taste at the end. So at this point, you need to do whatever you need to do to start bringing your temperature or your smoker up to temp. While the smoker is coming up to temp, we're going to finish the ribs. The next step is we want to coat the ribs in yellow mustard, a very thin layer of yellow mustard. Now, for those of you that are thinking, oh, whoa, I don't like yellow mustard, that's okay. The yellow mustard isn't going to give it any flavor. All the yellow mustard is it gives the rub something to stick to when you put the rub on the ribs. So you just want to coat the entire ribs, the sides, the bottom, everywhere. And then after which, you're going to take your rub and you're going to sprinkle your rub, however thick you want, on the ribs. And you want to make sure you get the top, the bottom, and the sides. So now we're going to go back and we're going to check on our smoker. We're going to make sure it's up to temp. If the smoker is up to temp, that's perfect. That's exactly what we want it to be. So we're going to add the wood chips that we want. And it's really up to you. For me personally, I like the taste of a like a heavy smoke. I really like to taste the smoky flavor, so I'll use like a hickory or a mesquite wood chip to get that kind of flavor. If you're not that kind of person, you really don't like that, that's fine. You can use cherry wood, you can use pecan wood, you can use apple wood. All of them are going to give you a good smoky flavor. Some are going to be a little bit sweeter than others, and some are going to be a little bit bitter than others, and so it's just really whatever your taste is the type of wood you want to use. So while your ribs are smoking, it's very important to keep them moist. The smoke really does dry out meat, and if you remember at the beginning of the podcast, I made a claim that smoked meat is some of the juiciest meat. Yes, that is the case, but you're going to have to help it along. You have to help keep it moist, and what you spray on it is up to you. I usually use like a red wine vinegar and apple juice mix, just because that really breaks down the meat, and the meat allows that to soak through and keep the meat moist. And you'll want to spray these down 3 or 4 times during this smoking process. So at a certain point, meat will no longer take on smoke, and it's at this point that we want to pull the meat, or in this case the ribs, off of the smoker. And for this particular recipe, they're going to be on for about 3.5-4 hours, somewhere between there. And what you're going to kind of want to look for is the meat to start to pull away from the bones. And that's kind of a good way to tell that it's time to take them off. The next step is we really want to focus on tenderizing the ribs so we can get that fall off the bone rib that we all dream about. And so how we're going to do this is we're going to lay out some tin foil, and you want to make sure it's a heavy duty tin foil, and you're going to put the ribs on the tin foil with the meat side down. And then you're going to put on top of the ribs some butter and some honey and some brown sugar, and then you're going to wrap it all up so that none of the juices can fall out. And then you're going to go put it back on the smoker for another couple hours. And you want to make sure when you put it on the smoker this time, instead of having the meat side up, you want the meat side down. And the reason for this is because all those juices are going to kind of pool in the bottom of that tin foil, and we want that meat to soak in that tin foil, to sit in that tin foil, and just to become really tender and juicy. After you let them sit for a couple hours, you're going to pull them off and open up the tin foil, and you want to be very careful because the ribs are going to be pretty fragile at this point, but you want to take them off and put them on. I usually use a cookie drying sheet, and I will put them on there with the meat side up, and this is when you're going to add your barbecue sauce. Now, why do we add the barbecue sauce at the end? Well, barbecue sauce is a burning agent. If you were to put the barbecue sauce on at the very beginning, all you would have is burnt, nasty barbecue sauce at the end. Okay, the barbecue sauce only needs to be on the ribs for maybe 15 minutes or so. And so at this point, we're going to smother our ribs in whatever barbecue sauce that you want. And then you're going to go put them back up out on the smoker for another 15-20 minutes. So you don't want to overdo it. You don't want all the juices to fall out of your ribs, and you just want to kind of caramelize the barbecue sauce that's on the ribs. After that 15 or 20 minutes, you're going to pull them off, and then your ribs are done. This is when you can cut into them and you can eat them, and at this point they should just be falling off the bone, and your mouth is watering, and you're just super happy with your end product. If you're not happy with it and they didn't turn out the way that you want them to, that's fine. Okay, if this is your first time, try it again and again. Okay, smoking is really an art, and it really takes time and practice to get the meat the way that you want it to taste, the way that you want it to be, how soft you want it to be, and different things like that. So don't be discouraged if it didn't work out the first time. Try it again and try it again and try it again, and just keep working on it until you figure out what works best for you. So to kind of tie this all together, to me, smoking is a lot of fun. I do it because I really enjoy it. I enjoy when someone comes out and smokes with me, because then I can sit down and talk with them and have a good time, or I could turn the football game on and watch a football game, or whatever the case may be. But just kind of a fun story is I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to afford a smoker. When I learned to smoke on a competition smoker, and it was absolutely ginormous. And I'm like, there's no way that I'm ever going to be able to afford one of these, let alone find a place to put it. And so I actually built me a smoker out of a filing cabinet. Yes, it's really that easy. You can build a smoker out of a filing cabinet. You can look it up on YouTube or Google or whatever, and the plans are there. So if this is something that you want to get into and you're not sure if you really want to spend a lot of money, then throw together a smoker filing cabinet smoker, and it works just as good. I pulled off ribs and fish and chicken off of this smoker, and it was absolutely delicious. Since then, I've upgraded, but like I said, it's just, no matter what you upgrade to or how expensive your smoker is, it just takes time, patience, and practice. And it really just comes down to personal preference. Find out what tastes good to you. Find out what you like, and then go for it. Well, that's the end of the podcast. Like I said, I will post in the description below the actual ingredients and the actual process and the more like specific numbers on how much I use of what in the description below. So if you're doing it for the first time, don't worry, I'll post that so you can do it. Because I realize that I've been kind of broad throughout this entire podcast. But like I said before, I just wanted you to get the gist and the process of smoking and kind of a little bit of the history and the history of ribs and smoking and different things like that. So, hey, thanks for listening, and stay tuned for the next one.